So picking up from where we left off Sunday morning, we're looking at Matthew chapter 26, verses 36 and 37. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray over there." And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. And we had already been looking at these verses quite a bit. So the idea I wanted to look at before we kind of end with these verses was this idea of sorrow and distress. It also seems to refer back to some of the Psalms, and Psalm 43 verse 5 is one example. There's also in Psalm verse 42, and I think it appears possibly even at the end of Psalm 42 again, very similar. I don't remember if the verses are all identical, but they're extremely similar. But this is the one I chose as our example. So, why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you disquieted within me? Hope in God, for I shall yet praise him, the help of my countenance and my God. And this is the same idea expressed as being the sorrow and distress that Jesus felt. That's the connection I was making here. Yet his hope is in God. He will praise him. And of course, he prays to him. And this is a good lesson for us that in times of distress, we still have hope in God. Again, Jesus sets a good example for us. We can praise God and lift our spirits even in hard times. And like I said, Psalm 42, verse 5 is almost identical. And I think maybe verse 11 as well, but I forgot about that one. So let's come back here and is there anything else on these verses? And that was the last thing I had on these verses. Okay. So if we look at the next couple of verses, 38 and 39, then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me." He went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Now, question 7 in our workbook, it kind of goes with 3 different verses, so I've kind of broken it out. Here, as our first example in verse 39, what is Jesus praying for in the garden? Sorry, Matt. Right. If it's possible, can this cup pass from me, right? But not as I will, but as you will. So Jesus sets this very valuable example that while we may pray for certain things in our lives, we should also pray that God's will be done, even if it goes against what we would rather have, right? Even if it goes against what we would want. So let's look at Mark. Mark chapter 14, verses 34 through 36. Then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch." He went a little farther and fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will." It's worded a little differently here in Mark, but the idea and the essence of it, the meaning is the same. So if we come back to our verses in Matthew, in verse 38, what is Jesus saying about himself? He is intensely sad and distressed. That's the Greek words there. He's intensely sad and distressed. Now, is he really going to die of sadness? No, that's just a turn of phrase, right? That's like we would say, "I'm so lonesome I could cry. I'm so sad I could die." That type of thing. He's saying that type of thing. So we just have to realize he's stressing how sad he is. Now, who is Jesus asking or telling to stay and watch? That's Peter, James, and John, right? Peter, James, and John, the three pillars, as Paul mentioned, these are his closest friends and disciples. And remember, from a human standpoint, Jesus, we talked about this a little bit. He's a young man of about 33. He knows what's coming. He's always known, but it's still sad and distressing. And he wants the support of his friends at this time, what he's going through. What is Jesus asking when he says, watch with me? Yeah, man.
Kind of like be on guard or just be here for me.
That's probably the main part of it, is be here for me. Now, there is a meaning, like you're saying too, of kind of like being on guard, being watchful. But the largest part of it is just be here with me, right? This is a tough time I'm going through. Just be here with me. Now, what's in verse 39, what's Jesus' posture as he prays? He fell on his face. He's prostrate on the ground. He's like, that's the most humble position that I could think you could take. And he's distressed, and he's just laid out on the ground. He's being extremely humble, and he is, asking this of God, if this is possible or not. So again, this is probably the most humble position he could take. Yes. The word what? Cup? Okay, well, the cup that Jesus is going to drink, okay, that he drinks for us, is the cup of God's wrath. The judgment and wrath that we deserve for sin, that's the cup he drinks, so that we don't have to. Now, that's for believers, and anyone who will believe in Jesus can have that same blessing, that same benefit. We will not have to face that wrath unless we walk away from the Lord. Yes, Matt. I think Addie had something. I'm sorry.
I think this prayer here, like Jesus essentially praying, hey, help me avoid going to the cross. It's kind of this. But your will be done,
Right.
Like there's this balance of his humanity and his God.
Yes.
And this and the temptations of Jesus, I think we tend to spiritualize like, well, he's God. Those are just formalities. He's just saying stuff like he was suffering and drops of blood and all this, and the temptations. Those were real things, not the deep sin.
No.
Some of the temptations were about avoiding the cross, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's an extreme temptation he's going through. And I was actually going to get into that at some point, but yes, that's true. That's an extreme temptation for him to avoid going to the cross. Hold on just a second. Addie, did you have something? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, being man and living on this earth, he had seen crucifixion before.
Yes, they all have. Yep.
So he knew, and we think we know, but we have no clue of the suffering that is involved in being crucified.
I do not.
There was a program on TV. I couldn't watch it all because it was so close. It wasn't just the breathing and trying to get your breath. Every muscle, every tendon in your body suffered.
Everything hurts.
Everything cracked.
That's my understanding. Everything about that hurts.
It's the most powerful thing of human, more than we've ever had to experience.
Right.
And so, man, just don't. We read it too lightly sometimes, I think.
I think so. The crucifixion is so horrible, and every moment of it he endured so long, and he endured all that for us, and it is a horrible, painful way to die. And I read like what do they call it? They called it kind of a doctor's description of it, and it's way worse than maybe we realize. I'm sorry, Gary.
I'm looking at this verse and it says, "Dear my Father, if it is possible."
Yes, if it is possible.
The other verse you had, it says, "All things are possible." That kind of is like, I look at that and I think, was there another plan that could have been? God said, no, I want this. Or with the if, it's possible, meaning there was no other plan. It had to be this. Kind of makes me think.
Well, all things are possible. The thing is, though, God had this plan, right? And so Jesus is really just asking, like you're saying, really, that human part of him is asking, if it's possible, I would rather not do this. But if this plan is the way, if this is the best way, I'm going to say it that way because there could be other plans, but God always does what's best for us. So that's my first thing. His intention to us is always what's best for us. So in that case, this was the best option, and that's what Jesus does. He follows God's will and does that. Okay, I think Pat had something, and then Mary and Eddie, and then Shirley.
We're talking about suffering and crucifixion, but he suffered before that when he was
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
He was tempted all the way.
I saw a picture online that somebody thought possibly that he would bump his skin into his bone of his back. But they really showed him. And can you imagine laying against the cross with that?
Well, that's the problem. They beat him. Well, I say that's the problem. There's a lot of problems. But they beat him. And yes, his back would have been really bad, ripped up pretty bad. And I say pretty bad. Probably it would have been awful. But then he's against that wooden cross, which they don't care if that's smooth or not. So, I mean, there's no telling how bad that felt. So that's just a part of it. That's really awful. Mary?
Well, I understand everybody's talking about the physical pain that
Yeah.
Jesus endured, but could the cup also represent the fact that he was without sin and he had to take on our sin, so he's never had to take on our sin, and the fact that because he took on sin, he would be away from the Father, which he's never,
Well, there is that too. There's like a mental emotional side. There is a spiritual side where because God is basically putting all our sin on him, that he does have that, however brief it is, he has that disconnect. My God, why have you forsaken me, right? He has that disconnect, be it ever, doesn't matter how brief it is. And because he's never sinned, he's always been innocent. That would be totally against his nature and totally against him, right? So yeah, there is that suffering as well. There's that spiritual suffering. Let's see now. I forgot where it was. I think Addie.
I was just gonna say the thing, but also we gotta remember, it had to be a blood sacrifice. Jesus had to shed his blood for our sins.
Right. He had to shed his blood. Yes, he did.
I mean, it's, it's gruesome as it sounds.
Yeah.
That was the plan even back in the Old Testament.
What's the old verse? There is no. Well, no, that's not an old verse. That's actually in the New Testament, isn't it? There's no remission of sin without the shedding of blood, right? So yeah.
And Jesus said that blood was our sins.
Yes, he did, and that's what that is. Okay, I think Shirley, man. I'm sorry, Shirley.
I take this as he's asking if possible, let this cup pass from me. The agitation and the pain and everything that would go with it, knowing that he was going to die on the cross. It was possible that he wouldn't have to go through that part.
Right. So you think it's?
I don't think he was saying. I don't think that Jesus was saying, if it's possible for some other way to do this. No, I don't think that's the situation. I really think it's what. How would you feel if you were going to be crucified and you are it would be hard to explain how you feel.
It would be very hard.
He just wanted to be eliminated of that, and if it was possible, if God, I guess God wanted to go through that, and he wouldn't have been going through it. And he
Right.
did get through it, but
Well, that was the plan, right? That was God's plan, and all he's, I can't like disagree with you or anything. He's asking for that cup, him not to have to drink that cup. Well, that cup was God's wrath. It was all that punishment. It's all that physical pain and punishment that he's going to go through. And plus the spiritual and the emotional. There's all this that some of it we don't even think about.
The physical part of it.
Yeah, there's all of that. Yeah, and really, I think we'll see that basically the answer is there's not. It's kind of a silent answer. We don't see a vocal answer, but there's not an option to do that, or it's not. It's just not in God's plan. Maybe that's maybe me saying that was the best option for us. I believe that's correct, but on the other hand, that means God had a plan, and that was His plan, and Jesus was saying, "I am going to follow your plan, even if it's not what I physically want to go through." We have to remember He's still committing Himself to follow God's plan, right? He's not trying to get out of it. He's not anything like that. But He's saying, I'm still going to follow what you will. Yes, Matt?
We were talking about how, this was an everyday occurrence for them to see a crucifixion. Maybe not every day, but they all saw that.
Rome was pretty free with it.
It was very common. For us, like you see a painting or something, it's kind of abstract. Sometimes it's almost, it almost looks like beautiful or something. But like there was that movie, I think it was about 20 years ago, that Mel Gibson did on the Passion of Christ. I don't think I've seen it since it was new back then, but as I recall, that was quite graphic, and it can be too much. But it's kind of like, to get the perspective of people that they all saw that, they all knew what that was, and for us, it's probably worth watching something like that to get a sense of what that really is.
Yeah, I watched the movie, The Passion, Mel Gibson's Passion. It's very graphic though, and it's really hard. I'm just going to say it's really hard to sit through and realize that Jesus really went through that, right? It's a hard thing to watch, and as best as we can tell, that's a pretty accurate thing. Yes, Caleb?
I've heard it said that with the configuration of how the Passover worked, that with how it's described in the Bible, He never drank the last of so many cups during the Passover. And that when He was praying in the garden, He was praying that He wouldn't have to drink the last cup and take on the Passover. So almost in the way that when He was lifted high on the cross and He was offered that sour wine, that was the physical last cup in a way. Like He finished the Passover. Because that moment right after that, He dies. Like it's His last breath is,
Yeah.
So what do you think that has any thinking to it? Or?
I don't know. I hadn't heard about that, saying He didn't, because I thought they had completed the Passover ritual from what I'd read. I thought they had completed the ritual before they left. But now I don't know. I haven't read anywhere where they said He didn't finish the ritual, but I don't know. Matt?
I hadn't really heard that either. It's interesting.
I'm just going by.
There was that, did have that sour wine or whatever on the cross.
That did happen. I mean, yeah.
But it's also true that the cup of God's wrath is a common motif throughout the Bible. That's where my mind goes.
We see it in Revelation. Yeah, the cup of God's wrath. We see that in Revelation. And
even to Caleb's point, though, when he finally did drink that he died, it kind of goes together.
Yeah. I'm not trying to put it down or anything. I'm just saying I had thought from what I read, the way things were, that they had finished that. But nonetheless, I mean, He does die after that. I mean, He does let His spirit go. So, does anybody have anything else before I try to continue? Okay. All right. Okay. Well, part of what we're talking about here, okay, is this prayer contradictory or wrong for Jesus to pray this? That's right. Okay.
It's right up in the human side. I mean, you get out of this.
Everything we talked about, the Psalms, particularly the laments that are complaints and kind of like pouring out your heart to God.
That's what He's doing. He's pouring His heart out to God. He's, sometimes we're going to be going through rough times. We're going to pray for certain things, but we're not really going to. Now, He knows, okay? So I'm not putting this on Jesus. But we especially don't always know what's right or what's best. And we're praying in the best way we can. But a lot of times we need to admit that we really want God's will to be done because He's going to do what's best and what's right every time. We may be praying for something that's maybe not the best or not right, and we don't realize it. That happens sometimes. So, but anyway, this prayer is not contradictory or wrong. He's still committing. If we just pay attention to the last thing he says, not as I will, but you will. He's still committing to God's plan and course. But we have to understand he's going through every temptation that we would ever go through. In his life, he goes through every temptation we would ever go through. And here at the end, he's going through a lot of hard temptation because he knows what's coming. If it was me blindly not knowing what was coming, I would still have a temptation to probably do a lot of things. But for Jesus, he knows everything that's coming, and he's being tempted hard. Satan is not going to leave him alone. So what's the most important thing to Jesus in this prayer? That God's will be done, right? That's the most important thing, and that should be our most important thing. He's always setting an example for us. And this reminds me of a verse I tried to paraphrase a week or two ago, and I did a horrible job. But if you look at John chapter 12, verse 27, again, Jesus knows his time is drawing near. He knows it's getting close. And he says this, "Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. But for this purpose I came to this hour." So Jesus, he knows what he's going to do, and he knows why he's doing it. He knew what was going on. So he's not trying to get out of God's plan or God's will. And instead, he's pledging to keep that plan and follow God's will, even through that death we're going to read and see him go through. Okay, so what was God's answer here, as near as we can tell? Basically silence, right? Basically there's, for this purpose, this is God's plan, and that cup is not going to pass. Jesus is going to drink from that cup. He's going to take all of God's wrath for us. Yes, Pat?
God himself told us, I'm very pleased with my son, very good.
Yeah, he tells them to listen to him, right? Because, and God does that audible voice. And I just think it's worth mentioning here, there is no audible voice, right? Not that we have recorded, not that we're aware of. Sometimes we will have desperate prayers, and we will have answers that we want, and we won't get those answers the way we want to get them. Sometimes we have to trust God's will for us. Trust that he wants the best for us, and that we will see his will performed. Yes, Matt?
Now, I think we're jumping around Gospels here. I think Luke's Gospel. At this point,
There's
talks about the angels coming to cover his baby.
No.
From the Father.
Okay, no. Luke's Gospel tells of one time Jesus prays at the end. So he's only telling us about the third time. So we will get there. But Luke's Gospel does not mention the first two prayers. And I'll show you why that is when we get there, because it flows right into Judas showing up. And I've got it to where all the Gospels will be kind of in sync when we do that. But for some reason, Luke does not mention the first two prayers. He just mentions the last one. Let's see. All right, so we should, I tried to remember where I was and what I was thinking. Anyway, sometimes the answer is not going to be what we want, is what I'm getting at. Sometimes the answer is not going to be what we want. It's not going to be what we expect. But God will give us the best and most correct answer. And it's okay to admit to God when we go to him in prayer that we don't know what the best answer is. It's okay to pray for his will to be done and for him to help us without us having a clue as to what we need. That's okay. because he knows. And, the Spirit also intercedes for us in ways that maybe we don't understand, but we're told that he does, and I trust in that. Anything else on these verses? Okay. Let's see. So the next verses, 40 and 41. Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping and said to Peter, "What? Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." If we look at Mark, then he came and found them sleeping and said to Peter, "Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." It's pretty much the same as Matthew. He kind of calls out Peter initially because he's found them sleeping. Now, why do you think he calls out Peter like that initially? He's kind of the leader. He's also the one that, if you remember a little, just a little bit before this, before they got to the Garden of Gethsemane, he was so vehement that he was not going to deny Jesus. He would never deny Jesus. He would die for him. And Jesus is kind of lightly chastising him here. You can't even stay awake for an hour, but you're going to die for me. He's kind of, like I said, just chastising him a little bit. Now, let's see. Also, well, and what point do you think he's making with this? Jesus is making a point to him.
Well, they're letting him down.
Yeah, well, yeah, there is that actually. That's probably a good point too. I didn't think about that, but that's true. They're letting him down, and you're not as strong as you think you are yet, right? He's not putting him down, but it's like, kind of letting him know you can't stay awake for 1 hour. But there again, they are letting him down. And while he did direct this to Peter, the part where Jesus asks, "Could you not watch?" that's actually plural. I think we may have mentioned that at some point, but that's actually plural, and it's more like, "Could y'all not watch?" Right? So he's actually, at that point, he's talking to all three of them. Yes, Pat?
Scriptures say, take heed lest you fall.
Right. Take heed lest we fall. Yeah. And that's, you could look at that way, that he's reminding Peter of that, to take heed. Well, actually, that wasn't written yet, was it? Probably wasn't written yet. But anyway, that is what the scripture says, though. Anyway, so he was actually speaking to all of them. And then, why should they watch and pray? Right. He says not to enter into temptation, right? The idea of entering into temptation is that you've already fallen into it. So the praying is to keep you from falling into those temptations, right? If you've entered into it, then the temptation has you already. You've already lost. So we don't want that. If you enter into it, you're past the tempting phase. You have given in. So that the wording may be a little strange for us, but the idea is fairly simple. Now, looking at the Greek word for willing, where he says the spirit is willing, it actually means the spirit is ready, is eager, not just willing, but ready and eager. And the spirit is ready, for prayer and for godly things. And by comparison, the flesh, more of our human self, is weak, feeble, infirm, basically sick, is the idea there, where he says the flesh is weak. And that's not an excuse for sin, but it's a warning to us that our flesh is weak and is trying to work against us a lot of times. Now, Jesus knows exactly how weak the flesh is. I don't doubt that in his mind, that his human side is screaming that it does not want to die. I mean, just think about that. If you know you're going to die, there's going to be a part of you that's really resistant to that idea. But Jesus controls that. He subjugates his flesh, as we'll call it. He subjugates that, and he's following God's will. And again, that's setting an example for us that we need to subjugate ourselves, our fleshly desires and thoughts. We need to exercise discipline over our bodies. And it's hard to do. It's hard to do. It's very, very difficult. We may fail in different ways, but still, the lesson is valid. We need to control ourselves, control our fleshly desires, and control our bodies as much as we can. And Jesus is in control. The Lord is always in control. Remember, like I've said before, He's controlling going to the cross. He's controlled the timing of this. He's controlled everything to be in God's will, to be in the right place at the right time for that plan. So He is staying in control the whole time. And there's a contrast we see here with the disciples, and this is kind of switching topic a little bit, I suppose, but there's a couple of contrasts. One contrast we see here, the disciples are sleeping peacefully over here, and Jesus is agonizing over there, right? And I'm not trying to put down the disciples. I'm not saying I would do any better, but his suffering is great, and yet his closest friends, those closest to him, you know, they're letting him down, like Matt was saying earlier. They're not really being there for him. And we have to kind of, you know, wonder about ourselves, or would we have done any better? And in that light, are we doing any better for each other? Are we there for each other? Are we helping each other in this life? And then many times in life, we may feel alone, like Jesus. We may feel like our friends and family aren't there, and they're not there for us. We may feel alone, but at those times, we want to remember that we're not alone. The Lord is with us. And if we look at Philippians chapter 4, verse 5 quickly, and really going to look at verses 4 through 7, because I like the whole context. I think it's very important that we understand the whole context of this uplifting message. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. And that's part of what Jesus is drawing from these prayers, is this peace. And he's reaching out to God because God is there. God is at hand. He can reach out to him. And that's what this verse is telling us about the Lord. If we are feeling alone like that, the Lord is there. We can reach out to him. He's right there for us and with us. So, because that was the verse I was really focusing on, but I just feel like this whole context is very good, that we can reach out to him and he will ease that craziness that gets in our minds, right? But sometimes when we're under hardship and duress. So let's see. And we need to also remember that we have the Lord's Spirit with us wherever we go. We're repeatedly told the Lord will not leave us nor forsake us. So these things we need to remember. If we feel like all the world is against us, which it was in a way against Jesus, as far as his world was against him, but God is with us. So we don't want to ever give up or give in to fear. If we go back to our verses, the other contrast here is that Jesus is in prayer, committing to doing the Father's will. And again, the disciples, all he asked them to do was just stay awake and watch, and they're not able to accomplish that simple thing, right? With what Jesus is going through and what he's facing compared to just, being awake and watching. So there's that as well. Anything else on these verses? We're out of time for this evening. Does anybody have anything else you want to mention at all? All right. So thank you for your time and your attention. We'll pick up from here Sunday morning.